Imagine a world where you don't even have to train your salesperson because whatever competency that salesperson lacks is now complemented from an AI tool.
AI is not going to replace sellers. It's going to replace sellers that are not using AI.
Everyone starts adopting AI. So then that brings the question, do we go back to a world where we prioritize the authentic human on the other side of the screen? Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining in today. I'm Michael, founder of Empath, Europe's sales and marketing agency for fintechs. And today I'm actually joined by George, one of my counterparts in the industry who's helping a lot of fintechs and businesses alike introduce new AI into their businesses. George, why don't I turn over to you to give a quick introduction to yourself for the team?
Thank you so much, Michael. I'm super happy to be here with you. I'm one of the co-founders of RevBrains. RevBrains is a leading revenue operations consultancy. We are working with a lot of the private equity and venture capital-backed companies across Europe, working a lot with SaaS and not only SaaS, B2B businesses. And in the past few months, we have worked on a lot of projects, very interesting ones, concerning AI and go-to-market. So hopefully today in this podcast episode, let's say, we are going to review some of the things that really have worked in the AI and go-to-market space, and of course the things that haven't really worked, right? Because in this space, we're seeing on the one hand a lot of hype, but on the other hand, a lot of things that are already driving a lot of value and a lot of impact for many companies.
For everyone listening, this is definitely not meant to be another episode on AI. I think you've probably seen billions of them at this point. So this is actually meant to be more from the focus of where we're finding real examples of this coming to life. And I think, George, we've got a lot of good examples there. But before we kick it off, maybe I could just give a little bit of an overview around what listeners and readers can actually expect for today. So first, we really want to show the common challenges actually that businesses mainly in the fintech and startup space face when trying to adopt AI, not necessarily from an overall global point of view, but really specific to examples we've seen. Two, highlight some really innovative use cases that we're actually seeing. And I think, George, you've come across some really unique ones that I think would be really great to highlight, as well as myself. Three, we really want to go into specific to sales and marketing in AI, because a lot of people in the marketing side have probably been told tons of things about AI. I think that's a very common thing we all know. We're seeing a shift towards the seller or the sales phase of a business actually taking on a lot more AI. So we'll bring some of these cool things to the table. And of course, it wouldn't be another podcast episode if we didn't have some kind of future predictions that hopefully one of us gets right. So first, I really want to paint a bit of a picture that maybe might resonate with some of you listening or watching or anything in between. But really effectively, you've got two types of startups in the fintech world that exist now. And in my opinion, you've got some that are maybe looking at AI, exploring AI. You've got, some that are on the cusp of bringing something in. Two, you've got another company or another startup that's actually embracing AI fully and has an entirely AI-driven sales process, has a lead engine that introduces or uses parts of AI, important to mention that, not entirely. And you have almost the entire revenue function being reported from the use of AI. Which of these two do you think will win?
Should I answer?
Phil, go ahead.
I'd bet on the second one, definitely.
Good to know. I think you're right. I think the thing is that it is a kind of a no-brainer to point that out. But a lot of times what we're seeing is a startup will start to get, will get funding, mainly in the fintech space, right? There is some inclination of funding coming back. We've seen some really great headlines with some good fundraisers happening recently. And it's always the founder's first instinct to go and scale sales and marketing. And initially that came with a lot of people, potentially. It also came with a lot of tooling that was necessary for these teams to be effective, also on the marketing side. But now we're seeing that actually when that moment happens, that second fintech we just gave as an example, the one that used AI, quite unanimously across the sales and marketing organization, is actually gaining a lot more success than the first one at that point in time. So maybe what we could do before going into all of the great use cases that we want to show, let's start with the negative, which is maybe counterintuitive. Why do you see AI pilots kind of failing? And George, you've maybe got some good points of view there you want to share.
Yeah, great story, Michael. I think that was a great overview. I could add maybe a little bit more before answering directly your question. I think we like to think, both of us, on go-to-market as a system, right? We can optimize many parts of this system. The more parts of this system we optimize, obviously the better the result is going to be, right? The thing is, AI in go-to-market has a lot of use cases, right? If you look at Gartner charts, go-to-market is one of the places where there are multiple use cases for AI implementation, right? Of course, you need to pick up the right ones, right? In order to make sure your organization really succeeds on the AI journey, right? So picking the right set of use cases is super important. A lot of companies, based on what their maturity is in terms of process infrastructure, in terms of data infrastructure, we are seeing are not picking the most, the use cases that are going to bring the best results for them. So this is one of the, let's say, blockers, because you have, let's say, close to 100 different places in the go-to-market where you can introduce AI, but realistically, you can work on, let's say, 5 out of those right now. Right. So you need to be very careful. And that's why a lot of people are bringing in external consultants, really to see what the best opportunities for you are. If you manage to really pick up the right ones, I can guarantee you're going to see great productivity boost for a very short period of time. And that's not the only benefit that you're going to see. You're also going to see very inspired people in your teams, people that can really understand the use of AI, why AI can be a driver of their own success as well, right? We're seeing a lot of people that are, on the one hand, fearful of AI, what's going to happen with my job, what am I going to do, right? But it's about really making sure those people understand that AI is the companion to their job. So their job is going to evolve, but if they manage to adapt to this new environment, it's going to be great for them. So this is, I would say, the second kind of blocker we are seeing. I would say, on the one hand, the culture that some companies are having is not at the level that AI requires, because AI is something super innovative, right? So we need this culture of experimentation. Of course, people should be able to make mistakes, but in order to find a way to use AI in their daily jobs, of course, you need to experiment until you find the best way to use those use cases, right? So this is the second thing. Make sure your culture is at the place where AI can thrive. And apart from culture, of course, you need to look at your organizational chart and the different roles. You have a lot of existing roles, right? A lot of existing roles which need to evolve. So let's think about, okay, we have SDRs, we have sales enablement. Just mentioning 2 kind of functions that can get a lot of impact, very good impact from AI. Let's think about how my role, let's say as a sales enablement manager, can look like in 2025 to be so I can perform the best sales enablement person in this world, in this industry. And of course, the third thing would be the data and process infrastructure. I think I mentioned already in the last few minutes. Of course, many of the transformational, the really transformational use cases in AI are tied to data and process. So you need to have maturity in those. But in order to start with AI, it's very important to say you don't need that kind of maturity, because there are a lot of use cases that are pretty easy to implement. Even using the most standard standalone tools, we all know those. We all know ChatGPT. Most of the companies have subscriptions to those. We all know Claude, Anthropic's tool, right? Anthropic's LLM. We all know Gemini, Perplexity, and so on. It's a matter of using those, not at 100, but 110%, right? So you can really get all of the use cases from there. And you mentioned marketing teams, it seems, are a little bit more advanced at using right now those tools compared to sales. And we are seeing an abundance of use cases around the sales organization as well. And we think it's going to be the next step of the AI evolution.
Yeah. So this is really interesting, George, because I think there's a lot that I wanted to make sure I didn't want to interrupt you, but there's a lot of really good things. So I was advising a fintech actually a couple months ago, and we were looking at bringing in, well, I won't spoil the use cases we're going to showcase soon, but we were bringing in a tool to help with some MEDDIC framework methodology, which is something that we'll discuss in a second. The sales team was incredibly resistant, was really reluctant to trust it, use it, and just didn't see the value in it, even though it was meant to actually take a lot of the heavy note capture and admin of that salesperson's world and actually make it easier for them. So I got thinking after that, and I really started looking at other companies that I know that have fully embrace AI amongst the commercial, the sales team. And I really believe that AI will not replace the salesperson by any means. I just don't think that's physically possible. I know everyone out there may think differently, but what I do think is AI will replace the salesperson without AI. I think this kind of connection is something that has really become more evident and prominent to me because, as you said, there's many use cases to go into. So I think that's really a good highlight you pointed out and something I resonate quite strongly with. The hesitance of adoption, you've named a few things. Let's talk about for a second a bit more on the culture, if that's fine. So you mentioned 100 use cases, maybe probably even more of AI. I love that. I think you're right. We're probably even only at the surface of, use cases. And I think we're even seeing now full sales teams being just AI bots, which means those use cases multiply into so many more. But that's a bit of a dystopian extreme world I hope we never actually reach to, fully speaking. But with that being said, 100 use cases, picking 5 to come into the business, that does sound like there's a lot of room for failure, because how can you be sure that these 5 are the right out of the 100 menu that you kind of have? So is there anything that you could say to mainly a fintech or to a startup when beginning to assess this menu and what they could actually bring in?
By the way, to your point, for AI not replacing sellers, right? Yes, I'm absolutely in agreement with you. AI is not going to replace sellers. It's going to replace sellers that are not using AI, right? And the other point that I wanted to make, like if you are passionate about your job, no matter whether you're in marketing, in sales, in enablement, sales engineering, whatever, if you're super passionate about your job, if you're following all the trends, right now the big trend is AI, you should not at all be concerned that your role will get extinct, right? Because the best people, right? The best people are going to stand, are going to be even more valued, right? At their companies, because those are going to be the people that are armed with all of the AI tools and are like multiplying their productivity by much. So just want to make sure everybody's calm around
We're
this
aligned.
point.
Good. We're aligned.
Right. So to your question, what are the, let's say the low-hanging fruits, right? The easy wins. Where do we start when we want to implement AI if we are at the beginning of this journey? First of all, I'm a RevOps person. RevBrains has implemented a lot of RevOps projects, right? A lot of the fundamentals, surprise, remain the same, right? Of course, we need to make sure we have a very well-mapped customer journey. We need to make sure we know the highlights of our customer journey. Like where do we get some drops usually, whether it be in leads, in opportunities, in customers, right? We need to understand where there is some repetition, like processes that get a lot of repetition, like those more mundane tasks. This is usually the low-hanging fruit, like the thing which you can optimize with AI very fast. And the other thing is, which I think if you explain it well for the sellers, it will be very well understood. It's removing many of the use cases in AI that are pretty easy, are removing the admin work for the sellers. Let's take an example of the note takers. We have some note takers that are right now even on steroids, let's say, right? This is very basic AI, like one of the most basic use cases, but it saves a lot of time and gives productivity. What it does, maybe let's explain it in just 2 sentences. It records your call, right? It transcribes it. Then it can directly say, no matter what your methodology is, whether it's METPIC, BANT, SPICE, whatever it is, right? It can directly say, okay, for the field which is describing situation or pain or whatever in your methodology, like it takes the best few sentences out of your transcript, right? And says what the pain is, for example. And not only does, it directly is going to field that's like to find that field in the CRM and fill it in. So this is usually the part of the job which the salespeople hate, right? Because most people want to be out there and sell. So if we make sure we, as the people that are setting up those tools, if we make sure the information that those tools are providing is correct, then of course the sellers at one point will get convinced that this is a very good use case for them and it's saving time, very obviously, right? If you have like 5 calls a day, that's a good productivity boost for you. And not only that, but very often it can always, it can also create a follow-up email for you, right? It can suggest best next steps. It can give you the red flags. So a lot of things that you can do with a very simple implementation of one tool. If we want to expand further, you can use this transcript to feed the content engine of the marketing team, right? So they can really well understand the pain points that you're discussing with your customers or potential customers, right? So this is going to be another thing, like another use case, which we are going into on the marketing side. And of course, this is also important for customer success, right? They understand from very early what are the biggest challenges the customers are facing. So something super simple, which you can set up basically in days, and together with sales enablement, you can teach the sellers how to use, can be a very powerful use case, I believe.
I wanted to add one thing to that because you touched on a very good point. I think with sellers, particularly for the admin side of things, I think this is a really great place to start with AI. I completely agree with you, and I've seen this starting to be introduced. But I think what's interesting is there's a challenge in that, and there's also a solution to the challenge I'll propose. So the challenge I've seen is the note-taking. I think this is great. I use a number of different tools myself. I was extremely reluctant in the beginning because I was afraid that it would get sent to the wrong person, wouldn't capture the right information, I'd miss something. So you've got to build trust with it, which I think people are now on the same page about. But what's interesting is how to overcome the in-person sale, because I have seen also a salesperson that was using a note taker say they were unable to capture in-person conversations. And a lot of sales, sometimes you're in a very trust-based industry, mainly fintech, in enterprise sales, which do require in-person that you can't always capture remotely. Now, what's interesting about that was I was at the beginning perplexed by it because I said, that's a very good point. You can't record everything in life. However, in those events, even now, I've seen AI being treated as a sales assistant, where a salesperson that had that challenge, this is where the solution comes in, was able to actually program ChatGPT or Anthropic, I forget which one they were using, to be honest, basically to speak on the way from the meeting. And they just left a voice note for this, for ChatGPT or Anthropic, to take this, what he was saying, put it in a structured format, and actually even apply it in a MEDDIC framework. So the output was everything that they needed to do to store in CRM. So even in the hardest to reach corners of a salesperson's role or life, you're seeing it creep up, which is a good kind of, segue, because I think we've now, got a good idea around how maybe, AI pilots kind of fail. And we've kind of now seen some examples around really why they might not work, right? We talked about adoption, we talked about selecting, we talked about culture. You gave a lot of really good examples there. Unless you have anything else to add, I'd love for us to maybe pivot towards now some use cases that actually are driving, the future of these fintechs. They're, driving higher margins for their sales and marketing expenses and operational expenses. They're helping to promote faster traction. Really, what are some of these maybe common use cases that are standing out to you? Because I've already got a few in my mind, but I'm keen to hear from you first around which ones you think are unique.
Let me give you several examples. We'll start with one which is super good and not super complex, and then we can go to a little bit more complex ones, okay? Just to make sure we finish the use cases on the standalone tools, like ChatGPT, for example, right? Let's not forget that many of those tools, actually all of those tools right now can be coached, or trained, let's say, from you additionally. So you can train your own agent very quickly with your product descriptions, let's say, with, how you're handling objections usually. You can, of course, feed them information on deal updates if it's an enterprise deal and it's, quite a long deal. And it can be like your companion, like your assistant. I'm seeing sellers, and we have also recommended this to one of our customers to try, for enterprise sales. This is a good use case. Of course, you need to feed your agent constantly with additional information, right? But it pays off, because this agent, if it's well instructed, of course, prompt engineering, maybe let's say here, prompt engineering is the new Excel. You need to understand very well how to engineer prompts. It's not rocket science. It's very easy, but you need to take a good course on that, right? And there are very easier ways. There are tools, specific tools that are for creating, going from a lazy prompt, which is usually what comes to your mind and you type it in, to a very good, to a great prompt. This happens in seconds. So if you're using those basics, you're going to be good and already save a lot of productivity.
You're right. That's something that's extremely important. And what I find though with the prompt, and this is mainly for fintechs or startups that might be trying to figure out what prompt to even use. One thing that another startup that I'm advising, so they've actually adopted AI for pretty much 80% of the entire go-to-market function. So they only have 3 salespeople, and right now they're, over probably, I think it's 5 to 6 million in ARR, which, at a very earlier stage, and they've achieved that quite quickly. So what I was trying to say is with these prompts, what this fintech did, they knew the salespeople they hired were going to be really salespeople. So they wouldn't figure out a prompt, nor would they have the time to understand the prompt. So what they did is actually had the tech team be the one to research and come with the right prompts for the sales team to use. It was basically like just a new tool. So therefore the salesperson I think they had a library of prompts that they could go into and ask for very specific things like, I am preparing for an upcoming workshop. Here's the CRM, information. Help me understand what my deck should look like. What messaging should I convey and who? I hope I'm not taking your thunder for some future use cases, but that is just to kind of tie together that what you just mentioned. So yeah, happy to keep going on to the use cases if you have some.
Right. By the way, you mentioned prompt library. I think this is also a great practice if you are starting right now with AI. Creating a prompt library where all of the people can input different ideas for prompts or prompts that have worked for them is a great thing, right? Because this way you're also creating this kind of team collaboration. Someone can share, oh, this worked great for me. Here is the result that I got, right? And people start, inspiring each other, right? So this has worked very well for a few of our customers. You cannot imagine how creative people can get, when they get into this mood. Maybe let's get into one more use case, which is very good, especially for transactional sales processes. We are seeing it also in fintechs, and we are seeing it also in very big companies, including HubSpot have that, by the way. I've seen it. This is with a completely automated, AI, they call it superhuman. Basically, instead of an SDR who qualifies you, you get a superhuman. What does it mean, basically? It's a person, just like you and I, right? I mean, it's not a person. Sorry, it's not a person, but it looks like a person.
Gonna say, George, that's borderline,
Right,
controversial.
right. It looks like a person. You might think it's a person, although it's not, right? It's been very well trained on the product itself, on how to handle objections. We've had a very nice conversation, for example, with the HubSpot AI. So basically when you go, that's the use case. Let me explain to you. Let's say you're going to a contact us form, you complete your details the traditional way we are used to doing it. But then when you submit the form, instead of waiting for, let's say, 24 hours for a seller to reach out to you as we are used to, you directly get the AI superhuman to speak with you.
That's actually, sorry to interrupt you, George. I love this because one, it might seem controversial for many because people would say, I want my best salespeople to be the first person to respond to that lead. But I always would counter that statement because in your example, right now, any startup or any company, forget startups for that matter, any company that is not responding to a lead within 24 hours is probably going to not be the most viable solution for this market. I know some people would say we have a 72-hour rule or, we have this exclusive approach. It doesn't matter. We live in a world now where everybody does expect some level of instant gratification. And so in sales, one of the biggest things that salespeople do that make them successful is really perfectly time when they are selling something to when a person is ready to buy something. That's the basic nature of a salesperson. So now we're living in a world where that window has become smaller and smaller and smaller. And so building on what you just said, if something as simple as a superhuman, non-human, mega-human, whatever we want to call it, is responding, it psychologically still keeps that window of purchase from a prospect open. And I felt very passionate about that because I think that's something that I've seen a number of times with salespeople saying they didn't have time capacity to respond to stuff. And I think this is just an example of solving that.
Right. And if you haven't tried it, we can also leave a link under the video. You can try what those superhumans are doing. They're very good. It's not just, we know a lot of the SDRs are junior people. It's not even replacing, or being better than the junior person. It's very, very good. It's like a very experienced salesperson, right? Because those companies that are producing those superhumans are spending a lot of time on training those superhumans, right? So you get very, very good results. And especially for those more transactional sales, like where you have relatively low deal value, I think it's a great use case. And if you think about it, those superhumans can be used in other parts of the journey, right? For example, very often when we are onboarding salespeople, we are going through a very standardized process, hopefully, right? In order to make sure they get the best training. So if you think about it, you can also train a superhuman to do that, especially in the first steps of the onboarding, where you are training the sellers to learn the product, to better understand the product, to better understand the different, the most common objections, right? To better understand how to do discovery. All of that can be done through superhuman.
Just to add to that too, because it's interesting, George, you touched on a point about upskilling and kind of onboarding salespeople, which is an amazing use case. And I think that definitely is one that is brought to the table, will be very valuable. I could even see it going so far as, imagine a world where you don't even have to train your salesperson, because whatever competency that salesperson lacks, whether it's subject domain expertise, negotiation skills, experience, whatever it is now complemented from an AI, tool or person, however we want to call it.
Yes. So basically, another use case that you just started talking about, we are seeing actually a lot of the big platforms around in the go-to-market ecosystem are providing those assistants that are joining together with you in the call, right? So especially for online sales, for online calls, you have your assistant next to you that's listening to the call and can directly provide you what's the best next thing for you to say, right? Or how to answer a specific question, or what's the best next step that you should recommend. Very often, you're saying, okay, I need to get back to you. I need to consult, with a member of our team. This AI assistant can help you with that. You don't need anymore to consult with anybody. They might be able to give you the answer directly. So we can see with a very similar technology on the back end, like training those assistants, companions, we can apply those to very different use cases across the journey. And those are just a few, and there are so many, which we're going to talk about a little bit more today and in other videos that we are going to record.
Nice. That's amazing, George. So I think I understand all the use cases from the salespeople point of view. I think there's a lot of stuff there that we've kind of talked about. I'll be open about marketing. I think marketing has heard probably tons of this. So I think we probably could even, save marketing some duplicate information that they probably already know and make this a very boring podcast for them. So we'll just skip all that. I'm sure they've already been told many use cases, which is great. But what I'd like to pivot a little bit before coming on to, more of the how we enable sellers and marketers particularly. But I want to come actually from the founder point of view on something, because a lot of times, I know this is mainly discussing sales, but a lot of times, early stage fintechs or startups, founders are the salespeople, or they are still, ingrained in some level of sales, especially if you're pre-series or before Series B. It's very most common. And in fact, that's likely how many of them get to the point where they are. So I spend a lot of my time advising founders mainly on how to sell as a founder who might be more product focused, who might be more technical focused, who might be more, even entrepreneurial in nature, but those basic principles there. So from a founder's point of view, what I find with AI that can be introduced now is when you're not really at the point of needing to hire your first salesperson, which usually comes when you've hit a certain critical mass of ARR or, something which is different for every business, of course. But if you haven't hit that point, but you're still in the founder-led sale, AI can be brought in now to be that quote unquote helpful first salesperson while you still remain the frontline salesperson to your prospects. And actually, it helps guide a lot. And I know that maybe sounds counterintuitive because I spend a lot of my time advising founders. And so you might think, well, doesn't that replace me? In a way, it does. But actually, what I found, it doesn't just replace me. It makes me able to be more effective for my founders that I'm actually working with, because I can use a lot more tools to give them more access. Not sure if you have anything to kind of add or complement from your point of view on that, but I think it's important we bring that to the table too.
First of all, I think for any founder who is operationally involved in the business, it's super important at that moment of the AI development to test out different tools, different technologies. Founders, we know many of the founders are the ones that are bringing the big deals. The founder usually at the beginning has been the one that has sold the first deals, right? They have devised the process, at least the highlights of the process. So you can be right now the ones that drive the example of how really we can implement AI into our organization, right? So I'm seeing a lot of the founders already doing that. And it can be just your founder energy, right, that can help you select the right use cases for your organization. So I think starting with the founder that's responsible for go-to-market for sales is a great way to start with AI, actually, especially for early stage organizations, but not only.
Yeah. I'm going to even veer a little bit into something else. I think that's probably on maybe founders' minds right now, just listening to this as well, because there are sometimes certain founders that actually are more heavily involved in product and tech. And this particular founder that I could think of a few actually that I've been working with as well. With this particular use of AI, what I found in another startup that's actually embracing AI lightly, they aren't doing it fully right now, but it's just beginning to. But the use case that they decided to take in was actually not necessarily to just focus on sales. It was actually more the notes and inputs from the sales stages were able to now summarize for the product team functionalities that should have been built and not according to the needs of a pipeline. So before we look at that, and we look at, especially in the RevOps world, right? We look at that from like a weighted pipeline point of view. You have this many engagements here. You have this much pipeline at risk of closure if you don't have feature X, and therefore this feature will get X amount of story points or score according to whatever the product team needs. But this new introduction of AI in this particular startup that I'm working with has changed that and added a relevance, not just from that particular use case, but also now what are the notes from the deal saying about this in particular. It also does some deep research to understand this more from the macro market point of view, which then basically saves a whole bunch of R&D time, which is interesting.
That's why they're saying the unstructured data right now is the new gold. Because if you think about it, like much of the data that we get is unstructured. We have the transcripts, we have the emails, we have the support tickets. Like those are very big levers. If we can take advantage of those, like every company has this information and it's super valuable. Previously, it's been very hard to analyze this kind of information. Right now, with LLMs, with generative AI, this is completely possible. So, of course, the companies that manage to use this unstructured data in a very good way, of course, are going to advance very much faster compared to everybody else.
Yeah, that's true. I think that's great, George. What I want to do is just because I have two more main kind of areas of topics I want us to focus on before we give the time back to the listeners. But first thing would be on effectively, we talked about different use cases of sellers, marketers and so on. But one thing we haven't really touched on, and I'm happy to kind of kick this off from a sales person's point of view, having been a salesperson in the field before and still consider myself to be, is around the habits that need to change for salespeople to start adopting this. So one very big change with habits that I've even found myself starting to embrace was kind of around the sense of how I viewed assistance. So previously, challenges, hurdles, objectives I had as a salesperson, I would always go to a product person to try and get me some insights on how to overcome this. I would go to a marketing person to help me create some collateral that I needed to create. I would go to, anyone to help me overcome something. What has changed now is what I would say my extreme ownership on certain things. And I know this may be polarizing in the space because some people say no one can really have extreme ownership. You have to collaborate more. But I find that now that I have access to so much more assistance, I can go and advise myself on what's the right, email campaign that needs to be sent. Maybe I don't have the experience as a, performance marketer has for so many years and such. And that's where we do still need that in this industry, full stop. What I can do though is avoid the little nuanced questions that need to get in the way and make me more efficient as an individual. So habits wise, I've had to now rely more on extreme ownership and change my perspective on getting things done. Have you maybe seen in your experience any habitual changes that maybe would suit a salesperson? Or if you haven't seen them, maybe there's some ideas you have that could help people.
Definitely. Changing the habits or evolving the habits is a key part, right? That's why at the beginning I mentioned we need to work on the culture. The culture, like making sure we're promoting the right values, is a part of the journey. I can suggest one practical habit for anybody who's listening to us. Think about what's the army of AI assistants you can build for yourself. You can even go to ChatGPT right now, put your job title there, and ask ChatGPT, what are the top 5 assistants which I can build for the next 1 hour, which can help me save a dramatic amount of my time? And you're going to be surprised what you can see. Everybody right now can get a team of assistants who can help them, right? No matter whether you're like a junior individual contributor or a senior manager, everybody can get an army of assistants, right? And we were discussing with you, Michael, maybe you remember some time ago, around the chief of staff. Like you can get a chief of staff in an LLM, right? Because the LLM can get all the information, like all the updates from projects. It can identify blockers, red flags very quickly. It can advise you on next steps. So even if you don't have a chief of staff and you're a leader, now you can get one almost for free, right? And with a little bit of work.
It's interesting because that's a perfect example, or sorry, segue into the future of AI, because here's my kind of crystal ball prediction to kind of set the scene. And then I would love to get to more your point of view, right? So I have a prediction. The prediction that I have is that we are living in a world right now that's shifting very quickly to AI. So if you think about the world we're kind of moving away from, just as a societal, I'll try not to get too, we're moving away from the industrial era or the industrial point of view when it comes to how we manufacture, create everything. And we're moving into, I think, what's being identified as the technical era, or who knows what this will be defined as. So we are in a shift. And I think that in fintech and startups and right now are at, they're one of the industries that is in the front lines of that shift. So on one hand, we're in this in-between phase where competitive advantages can still be obtained from obtaining the newest and best technology, right? So those that have it will adopt faster, become more competitive, and potentially have better results. But eventually the industry is going to level to a certain point, right? Everyone starts adopting AI. So then that brings the question, does authenticity now become the next future wave? Do we go back to a world where we prioritize the authentic human on the other side of the screen instead of the superhuman that we talked about or something? Or is that a world we're going to, kind of forget? Maybe a very big question to ask you, but this is kind of the thought that comes to my mind.
I would answer the following way. I think the winners of tomorrow are going to be the ones that really well understand what humans cannot be replaced with, right? What are the top human qualities? There are such qualities like being emotionally intelligent, understanding the other person, right? Really those very, very human qualities. No technology will replace those, at least in the near term. So I think the companies and the people that very well can understand what humans really excel at and what technology, in this case AI excels at, are going to be the ones that are really the champions, not only of tomorrow, but also we're seeing that today. Like having this very good self-awareness, differentiation of really where humans and technology can achieve the best results, because the symbiosis which we can reach out of getting those two together is great. Humans are there, like we have so clever minds, like humans can be super clever. Technology can be super clever too, right? If we blend those two together, imagine what we can get.
I think it's a good example of the two coming together and combining. And I support this entirely. I don't think that one replaces the other because one did create the other. A lot of conspiracy theorists don't know who created who, but that's another episode. This is great, George. I think we covered a lot of things, and I hope for everyone listening in, it was valuable. I'd say to really make this valuable, I want to just close out maybe by giving some advice for people. So to give some context, right? If you're a founder, a head of sales, VP of sales, maybe VP of marketing, CMO, CRO, anything really in these functions, people you interact with daily, advise, consult daily, what would be kind of the top or things you'd say to help them kind of get going, appreciate they're maybe in different parts of their journey?
If you are at the beginning of the journey, you can start small, but keep consistent, right? Keep it consistent. Do experiments, right? Try one new use case every day. you can very easily find a list of use cases, again, with one simple prompt on ChatGPT, right? So try out the different use cases, create like games for the team, right? Try to challenge them to come up with the different use cases and to implement directly. There are some things that one person can directly, go and implement if it's something small, right? That like you can see the result very quickly. So this is, for a beginner. And usually we are seeing the ones that are more advanced right now in the journey. They're still experimenting. They're the experimentators as well. They're just more advanced experimentators because they've gathered the data. But right now we are in a space of a lot of experimentation. So it's about this, but of course, structured experimentation, right? So you really know what's worked, what hasn't worked. You try to find the reason why it didn't work, and you continue this process.
I love it, George. I think that one other thing just to close out on my end is taking a step back to some philosophies, right? So since the 1980s, going way back, we've been in an OKR mindset. So we've been, as a business, in an objectives-based mindset, which means everything you do has to have an objective with an outcome, which is measured by KPIs, OKRs, health checks, sanity checks, everything in between. What's interesting is what you described, and I firmly believe in this. This goes back to beginning to switch into the experimental mindset, away from the outcome mindset. So the experimental mindset is about having small controlled experiments to enact change, which is there's a great book called Tiny Experiments. I'll actually drop the link in here as well, because it's a very good book that I've encouraged most founders to look at. But this talks about having small micro experiments that eventually enact to, but not always knowing what the outcome is going to be. So to your point, if you do adopt an AI tool or a process or put it in a part of your go-to-market and it doesn't work, it doesn't mean you weren't successful. It just means that you tried and tested and this was not what was necessary. So I think that's important for everyone to have. George, look, thanks. Thanks everyone listening in. It's been really a pleasure to talk about this topic. And yeah, George and I are definitely available to answer any questions that you have. This is our kind of specialty and the beginning of a really exciting journey. So George, thanks a lot for joining.
Thank you, Michael, for the fantastic conversation. And thank you, everybody who listened to us.
Take care. See you.